You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, I've got a guest who's going to help us learn a little bit more, think a little bit differently about change management and how that can impact your team or your organization. His name is Dr. Peter Rios. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Doug? Thank you for having me. Excited to be here with you and your listeners.
Amen, amen. Peter and I both, while we were in the green room, we were kind of commiserating. He's coming to us from the island of San Martin, and he and I both were recently in the path of Hurricane Beryl, and we both fared well, all things considered. Lost a little power along the way, but didn't suffer any serious property damage to speak of. So blessings for that, and happy that that we came through unscathed, right?
That's right. Thankful. Obviously, thoughts and prayers out to those who have or did go through some worse issues. But we're grateful that it was just a little power issue and a little rain for us. So.
Yeah. Well, Peter, if we may, let's start with a little bit of background. I always kind of like to ask my guests to share just kind of in a real, short version of your journey and what got you inspired to do the work you're doing now.
That's a great question. Really, it's just been a journey, as you know. Leadership is a journey. It's a process, right? And it's no different for me. Just my own journey from childhood traumas to neglect, those types of things, to growing, to maturing, to getting education, to getting exposure, traveling the world. That's been huge for me. I think that is something that every person and leader, aspiring emerging leader and leader, should continue to do, to continue to get that exposure globally. It's so important. To today, just consulting and coaching, as we were talking in the green room, and just really trying to see how I could add value to human flourishing and organizational thriving. And really, I've taken it upon myself. I feel led and called to help people, to equip people, to train people so they can become their best versions. I believe that when people are full throttle in their identity and what they're called to do and who their gifts and talents could lead them to be, I think that you have a human being who's empowered, who's motivated, who's encouraged, who's making a difference, right? Living on purpose. Versus, and I'm guilty of this at one point in my life, just going through the motions, just not having any target, any goals. And so, I've lived both sides. And so it's better on this side. And so I'm trying to bring as many people as possible.
Well, I think you raise a good point, and I've talked about that both in my blog and here on the podcast. I have observed myself, I think we all have a chance to be some kind of a leader somewhere in the world. You may not have a position or a title in a business that would point toward you being the leader, but, community organizations, small projects that come up and arise. I see it going on all around me right now with the damage that was created by Hurricane Beryl. There are little teams of people out cleaning up debris and moving equipment and helping others. And inevitably in that group, there's somebody that has emerged as kind of the leader, whether they got elected or appointed. They're just helping guide. And it's not an ego trip. It's just sort of a natural gravitation, because some people are wired to be leaders and willing to take that position when the opportunity arises. And it's seldom about the title or the role, but it's just about that sense of service and helping others to come through. So,
I agree. I if I may add, when I speak with emerging leaders, I'm always encouraging folks to join someone else and their mission and the vision they have, at least, you may see yourself in that person or that organization, what they're doing, where they're going. You may want to do something similar. So join them, add value to them, bless them with who you are. And I believe it's truly reciprocal. I believe that you get that on the job training, but you also see like what you don't want to do, how you don't want to be, how you want to maybe modify or pivot those strategies to fit your vision and mission. And I think that that's important, because you get real life experience, and you can also leverage, those for your own leadership. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I recently talked about the idea that what I've observed over the years doing my own executive coaching and consulting for leaders, I think it's safe to say that anyone that has climbed the mountain or climbed the ladder in the business world, they become a patchwork quilt of that experience. They typically, when I ask people the question, where did you get your current set of values and beliefs about what it means to be a manager or a leader, where did that come from? You didn't just wake up one day and, poof, you're sitting there. The opportunity to be an appointed leader might have been a kind of a poof magic moment, you got surprised by it. But nonetheless, when the time came, there was probably a set of beliefs and values that you started operating with. And the question is, where did those come from? How did you get them together? So in my informal survey that I've compiled over the years, I realized that the real answer is for everybody, it's kind of this patchwork quilt, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit over there.
Yes.
You pick up nuances, you pick up traits, you pick up ideas from people that you've modeled, or to your point, people that you saw operating one way and you said, ooh, I don't ever want to do that. I want to be different from that.
Yeah. Or even the good stuff, right? Oh, I would love to adopt that.
Exactly.
I would love to maximize that. And I love that you're saying about the quilt work, the patching, also the piece here, piece there, because that's what I started off saying too, was leadership is a process. So, I believe I'm a better person and better leader today than I was 5 years ago. Doesn't mean that I was bad. I just had a certain level of experiences, of exposure, so on and so forth. And as long as we are lifelong learners, you should be able to continue to grow and max that out. And so there's a lot of potential for us, right? There's a lot to do. There's a lot of need in the world. I mean, just look around you. And Doug, I appreciate what you said earlier too about, that the world is big. And so sometimes it can be overwhelming and people are like, what can I do? Well, I like what John Maxwell, writes. He says that, change your world, not the world, change your world. So whoever I'm connected to, the immediate colleagues, family members, community, as you said, I can partner with those and actually create change and transformation. So, it's encouraging to know that you can put your brick, you can add your piece, and you can leave a legacy. You don't have to live on earth aimless, and so even if you're in leadership for a long time, sometimes things can become routinish, right? And you're just kind of going through the motions. And so where's the spark? Where's the initiative? What's the new project, the new growth edge? So yeah, exciting stuff.
Well, I totally agree with you. And it's kind of like make a difference right where you are. People do maybe get overwhelmed by the idea of, and maybe they have a well-founded belief, I want to help change the world. Well, you got to do it a piece at a time. You can't, you're not going to get the opportunity to take center stage at the United Nations and do something. Right. I mean, maybe eventually you will, but the way you get there is little by little. Well, let's, the other thing I wanted to get back to, I love what you said. I think this notion of being a leader and exploring leadership opportunity and growth, it is a journey. And that's the exact word I use with my clients, that once you kind of build an awareness that leadership is a thing that deserves attention, deserves development, deserves consideration, if you're interested in being a better leader, it can become a lifelong journey of learning and experience. And you kind of alluded to it, but I'll say it specifically. Finding those who can be your mentor, and even if it's just for a season or if it's just for one part of that puzzle, find someone that has demonstrated a skill that you aspire to have, and ask them if they wouldn't mind investing a little bit of time, with you talking about that. I learned at a very early age the value of good mentorship. And as many of my listeners have heard, I grew up the only child of a single mom, and she had the wisdom to surround me with mentors. And it started early, and I got used to having people. And, as I got older into college years and early career, I wasn't afraid to go up to somebody and say, I really like how you do that thing right there.
Yeah.
Would you mind spending some time with me explaining how you figured that out and how you perfected that skill?
Let me ask you a question. I know you're the host, but it's
Sure.
something. Have you found that in different seasons of leadership, you've been doing this longer than me, and I was looking at all your social media. I was like, man, he's busy. He's doing some amazing work. In every season or because there's different levels, I think. Have you had to search out mentors for those different levels, coaches or people who have been there before? I mean, or are you figuring it out as you go? I mean, I know there's different ways of doing things, but what has worked for you?
I to that point, I still to this day, and I'm not ashamed, I'm in my early 70s now, but still to this day, I've got mentors. I've got mentors or groups that, for instance, I'm part of a coaches group that meets monthly here in the greater Houston area. There's actually about 30 on the roster of that group, but it's a kind of it's a men's accountability group, but focused on coaching and the art and science of leadership development, executive coaching, and we help each other. We can have a roundtable, peer-to-peer advisory kind of experience, bringing challenges, thoughts, concerns. We bring that to the group, and we get the group feedback, the group role play. It's phenomenal. But even personally, I've got now I definitely call him friend, and he's turned into a business partner, but I've counted him as a mentor, and he's a man that's a well-experienced corporate executive, Fortune 50 leader that is now retired, that I turn to for a lot of advice and counsel. And I keep doing it. I mean, it's just in my DNA to have that connection with people.
So what you're saying, if I can contextualize it, is that doesn't matter your age. And I write about this in my new book, Maximize. It doesn't matter how young or seasoned you are. There's always opportunity for you to maximize or grow. And it seems like you are a lifelong learner, and you are open, even at, as you mentioned, your early 70s, to continue to get mentorship, development, exposure. That's really encouraging to me, because sometimes, I seek that at times from certain individuals, or I'm wondering, is this newer initiative I'm doing or opportunity, do I need someone to help me, lead me on that, and you reminded me of when I was about to take my first, I mentioned to you earlier, I was going to be a vice president of university. I didn't know any other Latino, someone from my ethnic background personally who had done that. And I knew that there would be intricacies, intersections, nuances of being a person of color, so to say, in this space of academia. I met a gentleman who was a president at that time, and I thought, he's from Hispanic background. I asked him, would you mentor me? I'm going into this new role, and I don't know anyone else. I thought he would say, I'm just super busy, I just can't. He said, sure, here's my cell phone number. This was at a conference, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, he gave me his number, and he's still a mentor to me, up to this moment. And so, I look for people like that, but to help. right, like I said, bring them along, but I'm also always looking ahead of like, who can maybe nudge me, encourage me, push me in this next phase, And so your story is encouraging. It's encouraging.
Well, that's great. And a couple of points in there. One is, you raised a good one. You look at somebody that's kind of seemingly by title and position, they're sort of at the top of their organization, and you say to yourself, oh, that person's got to be crazy busy. There's no way they're going to fit me on their calendar. Who am I to be asking? Well, my lifelong experience, and I tell my clients this all the time, don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing that can happen, they may have to graciously say, I'm so sorry, there's just no way right now. But the reality is, what I've observed is that only happens about 1 out of 20. Usually those people, if you meet them in the right situation, if they were at a conference, it's probably because they believe in the cause, they believe in the work, they're there to share and experience and learn. So they're in that framework, they're in the right mindset to accept that invitation and agree to help. And the vast majority of leaders who have already achieved great things will be willing to give back. They will be willing to share. You just have to ask them. They will find the time. I promise you they will. The other thing that, to your point, yes, I've kind of made a commitment to lifelong learning, and I was reaffirmed in my thinking on this. I saw an interview recently with the great comedian and actor Steve Martin. And it was a really pointed interview in that he wasn't being goofy, he wasn't being silly, but he was asked about this kind of this observation that he seems to have actually gotten better as he's gotten older, truth be told, And his answer to that was, yeah, I think so, and I'm happy about that. He said, because his belief is, as we age, there's only two directions we go. We either become our best selves or we become our worst selves.
Wow.
And think about the old people, I mean, think about that.
Sure.
Think about that. And
it makes me think of intentionality. You have to be intentional about which way you're going to go.
Right. And maybe it is because of my own age, advancing, that I thought to myself, yeah, I don't want to be that crusty old guy, that's just angry at the world and frustrated and you'll let everybody know it. I want to continue to help others grow and develop but I think you mentioned John Maxwell. There's another quote of his. I too am a kind of a disciple of John's. But now I'm getting ready to butcher his quote. You can't give what you don't have.
Right.
And so if I'm going to coach and encourage others to be better leaders, I need to bring my best game. I need to have my content, my thinking, my material has to be current, it has to be fresh, it has to be relevant, and it has to inspire that curiosity about, that's a great thought. What can I do to take that on?
It's great. It's great. Yeah, it's encouraging. I'm sometimes you think, am I just a little too aggressive or a little too maybe opportunistic? Is that the word? But it's really just having a hunger of growing, of knowing more, of becoming more of service to humanity, and realizing the need, and that we only have but a certain time, right? Like that's the unique thing about being a human. It doesn't matter what your religion is, what politic or how you vote. We're all going to die one day. And the tricky thing about that is that we don't know when. So you could be 20 years old, but if you're going to pass away, God forbid, at 22, you're old, right? And if you're 55, but you're going to live to 100, well, you're still fairly young. So you just don't know. We don't know. And that's the tricky thing. And so I think that's where the encouragement for especially our listeners today, whether you're in leadership or not, like maximize your life, do whatever you can today, because and make today matter,
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Peter, I teased out at the top of the show that we were going to talk a little bit about change and change management. Let's get to that. When I think about that topic, I think about all of my clients who come to me, and inevitably they all voice in one way or another the same challenge, that things are changing so darn fast. Markets are changing. Work demands are changing, technology's changing. I think you'd had to be asleep in a cave somewhere to not realize the advent of AI that's upon us, and everybody's having to solve their thoughts about what AI is and can be. Where do you start with clients when they say they want some help with change that's going on in their organization?
That's a great question, and I think it depends on who's asking. But usually, if it's the CEO or someone who's in a higher role in the organization, I try to start with them, because as you know, people who are leading from the front really have to have a good grasp and understanding, as you said, of not only the external variables, but the internal ones. Both of those matter, how your people are, what's the organizational culture, and sometimes that's multiple cultures, because there's so many subcultures and divisions and departments. But then also the outside, and as you mentioned one, AI. I put that in. So, for example, futurists, we use what's called steep analysis. Have you heard about that? STEEP. It's like pastel and Porter's five forces, but steep is the social cultural. So what's going on in the social cultural element of society or in sectors. T for technological, E for environment, E for economics, and P politics. So every time there's change or disruptions in those different areas, that has an effect on you personally and organizationally. I'll give you a concrete example. So you talked about AI. That's a great one. I haven't dealt with that yet in terms of organization, but I have dealt with the S, the social cultural, with demographic shifts, with the growth of the majority minority, these things, right? And I mentioned earlier about being a new executive in higher ed as a Latino and wondering who could help me and mentor me. And I found another Latino who was a president. It's interesting because most of my mentors, just to be honest, have been white men. And so in this case, it's interesting that I find myself now almost like I mentioned earlier, add value to people, and it's reciprocal. Now I am actually coaching many majority culture or white men, and especially in the area of diversity management. That's change. That's change for their organization. Things are different. It's not the same when you're dealing with a group that everyone's the same, versus now you have a remote workers, you have diversity of workers, you have women in leadership, you have people with disabilities, so on and so forth. And so sometimes the leader, for example, someone's coming to me and is asking, how can I deal with this? How can I begin to maybe shift my organization to be more effective in this diverse world? And it starts with the person. Am I actually lending myself to diversity of thought, diversity of philosophy, diversity of people, or am I consciously or subconsciously, with bias or just fighting change, and so you have to work through those things, and it's not easy. Change is not easy. Dealing with human beings, as you know, is not easy. So
Right. Well, I use a tool that I understand comes basically from the psychology world and the clinical therapist world. When people show up to the therapist office and they're talking about changing their lives, there's this notion of an S curve, that you enter this curve kind of at the bottom. When the change event happens, there's typically a dip in productivity, connectivity, effectiveness, because there's this chaos, there's this uncertainty, there's this fear and doubt about what the change could mean. And so people aren't optimized. they say our brain chemistry shifts. We're more in the fight or flight mode when there's chaos and threat. We can't do our good critical thinking at that point. But as you kind of process the change event, you climb out of that and you start coming up the curve, and you actually ultimately sort of top out. You get really excited about the change. You go, oh, this could be really good for me. This could be great. So there's a bounce in productivity, effectiveness, and so on. But then it kind of levels off, thus the top hook in the S, and then it's your new normal. Mm-hmm. Well, when I first read about that, I thought that's a great model, and I've certainly seen it. But then I got to thinking about it, and as I always do, I end up finding a other angle to that same principle. The challenge in organization is that everybody on the team, top leadership all the way down, experiences their own personal S-curve when there's change.
Right.
And what inevitably ends up happening, leaders at the top of the house, they're the ones that strategize about the change or the response to a change. One of your steep values, for instance, maybe that feels like an external challenge. So you got to make a decision. But the leaders are climbing up on the top side of the S when the news is released to the team that we're now going to make a change. And the team goes through this chaos, but the leaders are up at the top, the team's at the bottom, and now there's this friction. Right. And what I tell people, the point of that story is, if you're a leader, you've got to give your people the grace to have their own experience coming through the right. S-curve process. And you need to lead them through that, but don't cut them off short just because they don't seem to be getting it, Yep. And is there a reasonable expectation of time to make that change? Yes, of course. But they need to make it. So you got to give them the latitude, and the best word I can think of for it is the grace to sure. process on their own and ask their questions, get their understanding so they too can climb up on the top side of that curve.
Yep. And also depending on the organization, like if you're thinking corporate, things change a little bit quicker, I'm sure not as quickly as some executives would want. But if you're thinking of like higher education and there's tenure, man, things will crawl because there's committees and right. And so it just depends on the organization. I like the S curve you're talking about. I also think Kotter's, model of change is still relevant. I just think it needs to be contextualized because, I think one of the steps, create urgency, but the other one is form a powerful coalition where you're going to need people from all those levels to be at the table at those conversations. I think that's what you're talking about. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That communication, closing those communication loops and having open communication is very important because those people, no matter what level they're on, and I know that depending on their sensitivities to that, you may not want or want to include certain folks, but for mostly speaking, you need people from those different parts of the organization so that they can be part of also your strategic planning and have ownership to what we are trying to do, building that clear vision. And then, those are like champions, ambassadors that go into the trenches, if you will, the grassroots of the organization and kind of be the voice of somebody who's way on top, the CEO, but somebody who's, mid-manager or even director or something, So I think that communication is very important, very important.
So in your experience with this, let me flip that a little bit. What have you observed is some of the reasons that organizations don't do change well? What do they miss on or fail to do?
Yeah, I think that we both were talking about it. The first thing is actually identifying what is the issue in the first place, right? And I think a good counselor or a good physician helps you diagnose what is really your problem. Because sometimes somebody wants to just give you a medicine because you have a headache or you have a pain on your shoulder, but is that really the issue or is there another root cause? So a good physician or a counselor, they will do testing. They will ask you certain strategic questions, right? They'll find the data. And so I think that as leaders, that's something we need to do as organizational leaders is, do the testing, the questioning. Once you really have a good understanding of what the problem is, I think that creating that coalition, that powerful task force, whatever you want to name it, who's going to work together to we have this issue. What's the plan? What's the vision to solve it? Who's going to be involved? And then we need to communicate that out. I think that's like one of the first issues, the communication piece. The second one, though, is there's always going to be obstacles, or what I call innovation antibodies, right? and so you have to also bring those people along, and they may take a little longer. Sometimes that's, when we have to either sunset a program, a department, or cut somebody, unfortunately, if they're not coachable. But for the most part, most people, once they feel like they understand it, they've gotten over their fears. Leaders we have addressed their fears, their uncertainties, right? That whole VUCA concept. I think people begin to move along. And then the third thing, lastly, I would say is, what short wins will we strategically put into the plan so that people actually feel like they're moving the needle? Because if you have a change initiative that's going to take 3 years, 5 years, nobody wants to do that for 2 to 3 years and never celebrate anything. You will be exhausted.
Yeah. That is a great point, celebrating the little wins. And I love your idea of factoring that in, create those gates or milestones that can be recognizable accomplishments toward your end goal, your bigger picture goal. And when they're hit, celebrate it and let people know, yeah, we're tracking, we're chipping away at it. We're going well.
Yeah, it's even like just say a couple, they're going to couples counseling and up to that point they argued every day, 3 times a day, and so the counselor is gonna assess the situation, but then help them to have a day free, without arguments, and if you do that, day 2, celebrate the first day because that was a big deal for you, and if you go a week, celebrate that. And so I think that sometimes, especially in leadership, your podcast, Leading with Common Sense, it's common sense. You have to celebrate the small stuff because not everyone sees the big picture, as leaders do. And so they're only seeing their day to day. They're only thinking about maybe their 9 to 5 or their shift they're working or whatever their specific project, the department. Whereas leaders are, tasked with the whole organization and, there's so many stakeholders. So I think that you have to have those small wins because that is what creates camaraderie, momentum. And as we know, momentum is huge and you want that momentum on your side.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, I'm looking at the clock. I think we're about up on time for this episode. I really appreciate you sitting in and sharing. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Sure, Doug. Well, you can reach me at peterriosconsulting.com. All my socials are at Dr. for Dr. Dr. Peter Rios. So at Dr. Peter Rios. And also in YouTube. So, there's different ways. Also, my new book, Maximize 12 Keys to Unlocking Your Greatest Potential, is available on Amazon at the moment in Kindle version, also in Spanish. So if you have a colleague, a friend, a family member who you believe needs some motivational and inspirational a message to get them going, this book is a practical guide to help kickstart that. So thank you for having me, Doug. I really appreciate it. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Amen, for sure. And well, again, thank you. And folks, as always, we're going to have those links in the show notes so you can get Peter's website and also links to the book. And sounds like a really promising read. I'm going to add that to my short list of ones I'm going to pick up. And folks, also want to remind you that we do have a YouTube version of this show over on YouTube. Same title, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives, look at all my guests' smiling faces as we come together and talk about leadership topics for your benefit. I think that's a wrap for now. So we're going to say goodbye and go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.